constantly had to move the family around because they were always getting hate from nearby white people. When Malcolm was 6 years old, they were living in Lansing, Michigan, which is in central Michigan. Malcolm's father stepped out to run some errands, and he was never found. The police found his body, actually, and what had happened to him was, first, some people, an angry mob had attacked him, they had bashed his head in, and then they put him over some railroad tracks, and the railroad came and cut him in half, almost. And then when the police came, they ruled it a suicide. They said that he laid on the tracks himself. Because of that, the family was never paid the life insurance policy that they had put on the father. So the mother was then left in a position where she had to feed 8 children by herself. Due to the extreme pressure, she got a little mentally unstable. And then the government sent their agents in, and they took her away. They put her in a mental facility. And then the judge split up all the kids to live in different households. So Malcolm went off to live in a household when he was in 7th grade. But Malcolm was a very bright boy. In 7th grade, he was at the top of his class. He was even elected class president. But then one incident happened that changed his life. He had a teacher that asked the class what they wanted to be when they grew up. The teacher asked Malcolm, and Malcolm said he wanted to be a lawyer. Then the teacher said, "You've got to be realistic about being an N-word." He said, "You're good with your hands, why don't you be a carpenter?" So this changed the trajectory of Malcolm's life. He dropped out of school, and he just never was interested again in school. Malcolm had a half-sister who lived in Boston. Her name was Ella. So Ella was his father's daughter, but not his mother's daughter. He moved in with Ella. She lived in a neighborhood called Roxbury. It was a predominantly black neighborhood in Boston. When he moved to Boston, he was like a country boy, and it was his first time in the city. He was overwhelmed by all the things that were happening. He started learning a little about the lingo. He started going to dances, listening to music, and he started to really appreciate the culture of just black people living and just being themselves and not being pushed aside. But there were also bad influences in Roxbury. Malcolm met a friend named Shorty. Now Shorty was a nice guy, but he also was a musician, and so he was kind of into some bad activities like doing drugs and things like that. So Shorty kind of taught him the ropes, and Shorty got him into smoking weed. Shorty taught him how to get his first conch. And what a conch is it's a method that African Americans used to do to get their hair to look straight and shiny like white people. They used to burn their hair literally. So Malcolm went through the process, and the more you go bear the pain, the straighter and the cleaner your hair is, the more it looks like a white person's. So Malcolm bared the pain as much as he could, and he got a good conch for his first time. And he continued to get his conch for many years. And that was one of the biggest regrets of his life, that he was eager to burn his scalp just to look like the white man. So Malcolm was only 16 years old when he moved to Boston, but he could pass for 21. He looked old. He looked like he could pass for 21. So there was no problem getting jobs or buying cigarettes, things like that. He got his first job as a dishwasher. He was a dishwasher on the trains that ran between New York, Boston, and DC. So it was a nice job because he was able to go and explore the different cities when they were on layover. So when he went to DC on layover, he was like, where's the black neighborhood of DC? And then he found the neighborhood to be in such poor condition that he had never seen before. And it was only blocks from the White House. However, when he went to Harlem in New York City, he found it to be a heaven. And he wanted to move there. So he got fired from his job working as a dishwasher because he was starting to get really rowdy, and he would be yelling at the customers like he didn't care. So he got fired from that job, but then a bar owner in Harlem, one of his favorite bars, offered him a job as a waiter, and he took the job. He jumped on the chance to live in New York City. So he moved to New York City and he started to work as a waiter. And a lot of the clientele at this bar were gangsters and mobsters. And they took a liking to him. They started giving him advice and little jobs to do here and there. So now he got really into the world of crime. The apartment that he found, the one that he could afford, was in a really bad place. It was in a building where prostitutes lived and worked in the same building. And so he was witnessing all this every single day. He also witnessed a vile yet booming industry of white men who would come just to seek black women. And so this also played to his hatred of the white man. But not yet. Later, when he realized, when he changed his mind and he learned about the nation. So he got into selling marijuana on the side, and then he quit his job as a waiter because he was making so much money. And he started becoming known as Detroit Red because he was from Michigan. Nobody knew what Lansing was, so he said he was from Detroit. And then his hair was reddish and his skin was also reddish. So they called him Detroit Red. He got some seed money and he started to become a big-time marijuana dealer, to the point where he was one of the Harlem narcotics agents' top people that they wanted to catch. He was really dealing that much weed. He was also very careful in the way that he dealt drugs. He would put blunts that he pre-rolled into a cigarette box, sometimes even a Band-Aid box, and he would drop it on the floor, and then he'd go tell the person where to pick it up from. So the police could never catch him. He was also moving houses constantly, so they could never catch him. He was only 17 years old at this time. So he was very young, but he was really getting up there. So he says that he rose to the top of all the drug dealers in the city. And he said it was a dog-eat-dog world. It was a jungle out there. And he was fighting, he was like a vulture looking for his next victim, his next person to take advantage of and sell them drugs, because that's how the world worked there. The only way he was able to stay sane was to keep himself senseless to what he was doing by taking drugs himself. Around this time, the government was drafting people to fight in World War II. And a lot of the people in the city were angry because they didn't want to go fight the white man's war. So one incident arose that caused a big riot. A black soldier was shot by an officer. And everybody just started running through the city, looting everything. And after this happened, Malcolm had to find another hustle. He had to find another way to make money because the police clamped down. But a few funny stories that happened from the riot that he tells. One of them, there was a friend of his who was trying to steal from a clothing store. And he went and he grabbed a bunch of shoes. And he came out and then he realized they were all left feet. So he couldn't do anything with it. Another funny story is a Chinese restaurant owner was trying to keep his restaurant safe from the looters. And so he put up a sign on the wall that said, "Me colored too." And they left him alone. So he started looking for a different hustle after this riot because the police had clamped down. So the first thing that he found for himself was working under a kingpin named West Indian Archie. West Indian Archie was one of the baddest men in Harlem. And he was also very intelligent. He was running the gambling industry. And he would take people's bets and just memorize them. So he would take hundreds of people's bets and just memorize them. So he was never caught with anything on him, like no slips with numbers on them that the police could arrest him for. So Malcolm worked for him for a little bit. Then he found another hustle where he was making a lot of money, but it was a very vile industry. As I mentioned before, it was white men looking for a taboo black woman. But this time there was a twist. The clientele were all famous government officials, celebrities, businessmen, people that everybody knew at the time. He didn't mention any names, but he said if he didn't mention names, then everyone would have been surprised. And even this happens today still, like the guy that was arrested, Jeffrey Epstein. He was doing the same thing. He was running a ring. So we don't really know what's really happening out there. A lot of terrible things are happening. Then finally he found a different hustle, which was helping a guy named Jaime. He was a Jew. He used to buy bootleg whiskey and rebottle it to be in expensive bottles. And then he would sell it to all the expensive bars in the city. And so people at that time, they were drinking some bootleg whiskey, but they thought it was the real thing. So one interesting thing that Jaime said to Malcolm was, he said, "Red, I'm a Jew and you're black. The Gentiles, aka the white non-Jews, they don't like either one of us. If the Jew wasn't smarter than the Gentile, he'd get treated worse than your people." This is what he told Malcolm. Around this time, another major moment happened in Malcolm's life. The guy, West Indian Archie, that he worked for, he came to him while he was in one of his favorite bars where there was a lot of people, and he publicly humiliated him. He said, "Pay me $300 tomorrow that you owe me, or else I'm going to kill you tomorrow." And Malcolm was so deep in the mud at this point that he did not care. He wanted to protect his honor in the streets. So he didn't care. He said, "I'm not going to pay you back." That night, Malcolm went home, and he took so many drugs in the short time period that he said his mind was gone. He smoked marijuana, he took cocaine, he took pills, he took opium, he smoked cigarettes, he drank alcohol. He did all this in a few hours. Malcolm said that if you ask him, tobacco in all its forms, whether it's cigarettes, whether it's chewing tobacco, whether it's Juul, all these forms, he said, are just as bad as an addiction as any narcotic he's taken. So the next day, a coincidence happened. His friend Shorty from Boston was in town. He was a musician and he was playing. And he asked Malcolm if he wanted to come back to Boston with him. And Malcolm jumped on the chance to get away from West Indian Archie. When he got back to Boston, everybody was so surprised at how different he had become. He came in a country boy, and then he came back now completely different. His sister Ella was very concerned at how uncivilized he had become. Even Shorty was surprised at how much weed he smoked. Malcolm said, "At this point, I viewed narcotics as most people viewed food. Satisfying his cocaine addiction alone each day costed $200 in today's money, each day." As Malcolm became settled, he started looking for a new hustle to do to make money. He got into home burglaring. So he assembled a team of his friends, and they started to break into homes and steal valuables. And one thing that Malcolm said he recommends for people, if they don't want to get their home burglared, then keep the light on in your house, especially in the bathroom, because if he snuck into a house and he saw the bathroom light open, he wouldn't know if there was someone in there or how long they'd stay in there for, and they would be making no noise. So if he saw that, he would step out. Malcolm said that he always knew he would get caught. This is the law of criminals. They always know they're going to get caught eventually, but they push it to the back of their brain by taking drugs. They don't want to think about it. They just keep doing it, and they keep taking drugs. So this is where Malcolm gets caught. He had stolen an expensive watch, but it needed a fix. So he went to a jeweler, and he told the jeweler exactly what it needed to fix, and then he left the watch. When he came back to pay for it, the victim of the robbery had already informed all the jewelers in town what the watch that was stolen and what fix it needed. So when he came back in, there was police waiting for him. So there was one detective who came out and started talking to him, but then suddenly another African-American man came in from the door, and then the detective, startled, thought they were both together. So he turned to the other man and he started questioning him. And Malcolm had a gun on him. He would carry multiple guns on him at this time. But something told him not to pull his gun out, shoot the detective, and run away. And he credits Allah for saving him that day. That's why he says, "That's why I believe that everything is written." So we have to understand, when we see moments like this, where we see the role that Allah played in our life and how He saves us, we have to remember these and use it to fuel our own iman. So he didn't shoot the detective, and he was glad he did, because 2 other detectives came out from the shadows, and they would have shot him and he would have died. So they went to court. Malcolm and his friend Shorty received 10 years, and there was 2 white women that were with them. They both received 2 years. even though they're all first-time offenders. So why is it important that I talk about Malcolm's past? Why is it important that he talks about his past in his book, his autobiography? In his own words, he says, each experience of your life fuses into your personality. It makes you who you are. So everything that he had been through had allowed him to accomplish even more. So never discount what an opportunity or what an experience can provide you for your future success. So Malcolm went to jail when he was 21 years old for 10 years. One of his quotes about being in jail, he says, "Behind bars, a man never reforms. He will never forget those bars." So that shows you that the prison industry is there to keep people in jail and keep them coming back. So in his first year in jail, suddenly he didn't have any drugs to take, and so he was going crazy in jail. He found a way to satisfy his need shortly. It was to stir nutmeg into cold water and a bunch of nutmeg and just drink it. So this provided him a temporary high. However, he was looking for other like real permanent highs. And so he started to make money and, buy things smuggled from the guards, because that's how the guards make most of their money. Their salaries are very low. They make most of their salary, they make most of their living by smuggling in things for the inmates. So yeah, this first year, Malcolm was very angry. He spent a lot of time in solitary confinement. He felt like a caged leopard when he was in solitary confinement. He would pace around and he would curse at God, to the point where the other inmates, they started calling him Satan. His nickname became Satan. That's how much they felt that he hated God. Well, the first person to gain Malcolm's respect in jail was a man named Bimbi. Bimbi was known as the library's best customer, and he was always telling stories. Even the guards were listening about philosophy and history. Everyone was interested in him. And he saw for the first time how someone can use words to have influence, rather than trying to scare somebody through fear, but actually getting respect through words. So Bimbi came up to Malcolm one day and he said, "You're smart, but you don't use your brain." And then he said, "Why don't you sign up for some of the free courses that are being offered to the inmates?" So Malcolm signed up for English and Latin. He signed up for English because he felt that his writing ability was really bad and his vocabulary was so weak. Then one day he got a letter from his brother Filbert, who was above him, older brother. And Filbert said that he had found the natural religion for the black man. The natural religion for the black man. And he said it was a nation of Islam. And then he advised Malcolm, pray to Allah. Then his younger brother Reginald, who he was most close to, sent him a different letter. Malcolm didn't know that they were together, so he didn't associate the two letters. But in Reginald's letter, what Reginald said was, "Stop eating pork, stop smoking cigarettes, and I'll help you get out of prison." So Malcolm, not knowing this was related to Islam, he started to think, what is this trick? What is this psychological trick? If I stop eating pork, stop smoking, what's going to happen? How am I going to break out? So he was constantly thinking about this for a while. And that showed you Reginald was smart. He knew how to get to Malcolm, to offer him something like this and make him think about it for a while and give him each piece little by little. This is how he got to Malcolm. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, his sister Ella was working to get him transferred to a different, better prison. And she succeeded. She got him transferred to a prison that was right next to Harvard. And so Harvard students would come and speak to the inmates. And there was a lot more space, and the library was huge. A billionaire had donated his whole library to the prison. So he had a lot more to read here. And then at this time, his younger brother Reginald came to feed him a little more about what this religion was. Reginald had also become part of the Nation of Islam. But clearly, we know that the Nation of Islam had views that are not true, that are not following the true Islam, Sunni Islam. So Reginald came and told him a few things, but what he said was God came to America himself and revealed himself to a black man named Elijah. And then he also taught him that, he asked him, do you know who the devil is? And Malcolm said, who? And then Reginald said, the devil is the white man. And this is what the Nation of Islam preached. The devil, shaitan, is the white man. All white men you see, they're the devil. So Malcolm's mind ran through all the white people he knew in his life that had affected him. His mind ran through the white people that had killed his father, the white people who had taken his mother away from him, the white judge who split his family and all his brothers and sisters, the white kids in school and teachers who called him the N-word, that one teacher who crushed his dreams, the white police that had hounded him throughout Boston and Harlem, the white customers that he saw that were going to the black prostitutes where he lived, the white guards who had treated him roughly and terribly in prison. And his mind ran through all these terrible people that had affected him in his life, and he came to the conclusion that maybe the white man is the devil, because he sure acted like one. They continued to write to him letters every single day about what the nation was preaching, what Elijah was teaching them. They call him the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. He's a self-proclaimed prophet. And they had many weird views. It's honestly bizarre where they came from. For example, their story of how the white man came into existence is called Yaqub's history. I don't know if any of you have heard of it. So what this story teaches is that there was, a long time ago, there was a race, the original man was black, which is true, the original man was black, like where they originated in Africa. So the history teaches that an evil scientist was born in their tribe named Yaqub. And Yaqub was banished to an island because he was so evil. On the island, because he hated God so much, he vowed to create an evil race. And so what he did, or what they teach, is that he created a bleached out race by breeding the recessive gene of light skin over and over. Every time a black baby was born, he secretly killed the babies, and he told the mom the baby went to heaven. And then if a light-skinned baby was born, he said, take care of that baby. And he constantly breeded the recessive white gene to the point where he created a weak race. They were weak in the way that they were easily tainted by evil. So they were more likely to do evil because they were weakened. So this is the story, one of the stories that the Nation of Islam taught. But they also said other practical things. Things like, you don't even know who you are to Malcolm. You wouldn't recognize your own language if you heard it. Our race is one of ancient civilizations, but we've been a victim of the devil white man that erased our history and pillaged our people. So like I said, they claim to learn this from the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, who's a self-proclaimed prophet. And Elijah says that he learned the philosophy of the Nation of Islam from a man named Wallace D. Fard, who came through the neighborhoods of Detroit. He was pretending to be a silk seller, and he would knock on the doors of the African American community, and he would teach them that they were actually the lost nation of Islam. So the interesting thing is that nobody knows who this Wallace D. Fard was. Even in history, the FBI said they could never track him down because he used so many aliases, so many fake names. Over 50 fake names he had been known to use. So nobody really knows who he was. And after only a few years of preaching this, he disappeared. And Elijah became the leader of the nation. So Wallace D. Fard was the founder of the nation, but Elijah was the leader. So if you read more about this, Wallace D. Fard, or they call him Master W.D. Fard, he claimed that he was the Mahdi, but Elijah kind of didn't understand. Obviously he wasn't the Mahdi, but he's claiming this. he claimed that he came from Saudi Arabia and he was from the tribe of Muhammad. But the people who have studied and tried to research him claim that he was actually from India, where Pakistan is now. So, yeah, Elijah kind of twisted what W.D. Fard was teaching him. And he started to say that W.D. Fard was God in person. And similarly to how the Christians say Jesus is God in person. So, and Elijah also used to teach the Bible and the Quran at the same time. So that you can see the effect that Christianity and the Bible had on his teachings in the nation. So after all this history, he started to think about it. And a side note, Malcolm said that later, when he became a true Orthodox Muslim and people were asking him, or people were telling him angry, how could they take our religion and twist it like this? Malcolm, his response was that the Muslims of the East, they did not do enough to teach the Muslims of the West, so they allowed it to become hijacked like this. So even today, we have to continue to give da'wah, because otherwise there's a vacuum left for people to twist our religion. And that's how these sects are born. They're fake. So Malcolm began to try to practice what he was learning from his siblings. And he tried to pray for the first time. And he said that it took him a week just to bend his knees and put them on the floor. Because in his own words, he says, for evil to bend its knees, admitting its guilt, to ask forgiveness from God is the hardest thing in the world. So that's how far away he was from religion. He could not even bend his knees and ask for forgiveness for a week. So Malcolm started to write to everyone he knew about these new teachings. He started to give da'wah among the other inmates. But he had a problem. His writing and his vocabulary was still terrible. So he was so dedicated that he went to the library, he grabbed a dictionary, he started writing down every word on every page. Each day he would do one page, write down every word, the definition, understand the word. The next day go to the next page. And he finished the whole dictionary. That's how committed he was to start learning how to actually speak and spread this religion. Once he read, he was so, he had a whole new world open to him, because now he could understand all the books in the library. Once he learned what words meant, then he was able to read books. So reading taught him many things. It taught him a lot more about the tragedies of slavery, how slaves were whipped and stuffed into cramped ships, how families were torn apart without second thought, how fugitive slaves were hunted down. All these things just fueled his idea of the white man is the devil. And these things were never taught to him in school, of course. He said the whole history of African Americans was covered in a paragraph in his middle school textbook. So he's learning about all these things, and it started to fuel his ideas about how the white man is the devil. And he was reading so much that every night when the lights turned off, he would go lay down to get the hallway light, and he would continue to read. So he's reading so much that he had to get glasses eventually, because he developed an astigmatism. And Malcolm said nobody got more out of prison than he did. He completely transformed himself in prison. And this is an example for us. When we find ourselves in a tough situation, try to make the best of it. So he started to teach the Nation of Islam's ideas to the other inmates, and it really resonated with them, because he said that the most likely person to accept these ideas were the inmate, the African American inmate, because he was at the bottom of society. And so these ideas were most appealing to that kind of person. So, and he says that's why people were afraid that the Nation of Islam was spreading so quickly in prisons, because they were the people that were accepting it the most. Malcolm also joined the prison debate team. After he started to develop his skills reading and writing, he had gained so much information that he was able to debate anybody on any topic. And he would pull facts from his brain like that. And he also, during this during debates, he started to develop his public speaking skills. At first, he was very nervous, but later when he was giving rallies in front of tens of thousands, that's where it came from. He practiced in prison, debating. One day, his brother Reginald came to visit him, and he started to speak ill of Elijah Muhammad. And Malcolm X was shocked. He's like, "What happened?" What happened was that Reginald was not he was not listening to the laws of the nation because he had a girlfriend, and you can't do that in Islam. So, but what the nation does, what Elijah does, when you don't obey him, he banishes you, and he tells every Muslim to ignore this guy and act like he doesn't exist. So think about what that does to a man or a woman, you know, that will really affect you when everybody's ignoring you. To the point where Reginald had walked from Detroit to Boston. He had no more friends. He walked all the way there. He had no money. He walked all the way to his sister, which was also Ella in Boston. He started to live with her. And then he started going crazy. And he started to roam the streets telling people he was also a messenger of Allah. Astaghfirullah. And at this point, all his siblings, even Malcolm, they believed that Allah was punishing him for him not listening to the laws, because this is what Elijah taught. Later, Elijah was to be found doing the same thing that Reginald did, but even worse. He had impregnated 2 secretaries against the laws of the nation. And you see how he punishes people, but he commits the same sins. So people started, the officials in jail started to become wary of Malcolm because he was converting so many people in prison. And so they told him, okay, we're going to let you go early on parole, a couple of years early. So they let him out of jail. The first thing he did, he went to his oldest brother, Wilfred, in Detroit, who was a Muslim, and his family were Muslims. He went there, and he started to live with them. And this had a positive impact on Malcolm's life, coming right out of prison, because Wilfred's family was very disciplined, very structured. They followed the suggestions of the Nation of Islam, which was wake up early. The whole family, they make wudu, they pray. They also had other things they added which were not part of Islam. For example, they didn't eat any solid food for breakfast. So this is a random thing they just added. But the thing was that the family was very disciplined, and it gave him structure in his life to move in with them. He started to go to the they called it the temple at this time. They didn't call it masjid, they called it temple. Later they called it masjid. When Elijah went for Umrah, he came back and he realized that he was doing everything wrong. He started changing some of the things slowly, and that's when they changed it to masjid, things like that. But at this point they called the masjids temples. So Detroit was temple number 1. It was the first temple. So Malcolm went to the talks, and he noticed that the Muslims were so disciplined, they were so neat and modest. They conducted themselves well, and they called each other brother or sister. They said salam to each other. So this environment had a good impact on him. But Malcolm was outraged to see that there was barely any seats filled at their sermons in the masjid. And he wanted to get to work in the streets, getting people, giving da'wah, calling them to Islam. So they went to visit Elijah in Chicago, which was temple number 2. That's where Elijah lived. They went in a caravan, the whole Detroit temple number 1, and they went to listen from him firsthand. And Malcolm had been writing letters to Elijah for years. He had been studying Elijah's photographs for years in prison. So the shock that he felt when he first met Elijah was massive, and he felt that he could not believe in any other person more than Elijah at this point. And he met Elijah, and Elijah told him, he brought up this idea of wanting to give da'wah, and because at this point the nation was only 400 people, and they weren't calling anybody. They were just doing their own thing, saying that, oh, Allah is going to bring people to us. But then Elijah, he liked Malcolm's enthusiasm, and he said, okay, go ahead in the streets and you can start giving da'wah. So when they came back to Detroit, Malcolm was going in the street using his tactics from all his different hustles in his past to get people's attention. and the masjid started to fill up. His approach was to go to people in the street and visualize for them in painful detail the horrors of slavery. And once he got to them emotionally, he would tell them to come to the religion of the black man, the nation of Islam. And this was his tactic. Malcolm became Elijah's most faithful servant. He had a father-son relationship with Elijah, to the point where Elijah's own sons were jealous of this relationship Malcolm had. Malcolm would go back and forth and study from him personally, often. Then Malcolm got permission to go back to Boston from Elijah and try to open a masjid there. So he went there and he worked in the streets for several months, eventually to the point where he was able to open a masjid just for them. Then he got another assignment to go to Philadelphia. And in only 2-3 months in Philadelphia, he had enough people to open their own masjid there. Then he got the approval to go be the minister or the imam at the New York masjid, which was a big masjid and a vital community for them to hit. So Malcolm became the minister in their Harlem masjid. When he got there, he tried to catch up with everybody from his past life. But at this point, in only 9 years, everyone that he knew that he was close with either died, was in prison, or was severely addicted to drugs, to the point where he didn't even want to make eye contact with them because it would be embarrassing to both of them. Malcolm thanked Allah that he had saved him from a similar fate. And this is a constant theme in Malcolm's life. He noticed that how Allah's favors were manifesting in his life, and he constantly thanked Allah for this. So he was always grateful. So he began doing preaching and doing da'wah in Harlem, and he worked so hard. Nobody could work as hard as him. On days he wasn't preaching or giving da'wah, he would travel to other places and make even more masjids. From Hartford to Connecticut to Atlanta, Georgia, he was building new masjids every few months. It was around this time that Malcolm, in his masjid in Harlem, started to notice a sister named Betty X, who was teaching the women's classes. And he would go and sit down on her lectures, and he would just oversee it. But he was thinking about marriage. He went and he asked Elijah what he thought, and Elijah said he thought she was a fine sister. So Malcolm X, being as direct as he was, on his way back from visiting Elijah, he stopped at a gas station and he called. Another important fact was that he found out after talking to Elijah that Betty was going through a tough financial time because her foster parents had cut off her tuition for nursing school after they found out that she had become Muslim. So Malcolm was determined to marry her. So he stopped at a gas station, he picked up a payphone, and then he called the hospital where she worked. And then when he got to her, he said, "Look, do you want to get married?" And then she said, "Yes." He was that direct. So it was also around this time that he was able to convince his sister Ella to join the nation. Ella had formerly been very strong-willed, and she would not just give in to anybody telling her to do something. And this is one of the things that she taught Malcolm when he first moved in with her: to be strong-willed, to be proud of your skin, to be proud of your heritage. These are the themes that she taught him. But now he was giving a lecture in Boston, and she was in the audience, and she decided to become Muslim and join him. An incident that stands out during Malcolm's time as minister in Harlem was the Johnson-Hinton incident. So what had happened was a man named Johnson Hinton was in a crowd where there was like a fight going on, and the NYPD came and trying to break up the fight. They cracked Johnson's skull into half, and immediately everyone was extremely angry at the officers. Within under 30 minutes, Malcolm assembled a team of 50 men from his masjid, and they were standing in military formation right in front of the police station. And the other African Americans in the community were so shocked by the discipline and the fearlessness that they showed, to the point where all these other people started joining the crowd and a huge mob came. And then Malcolm went inside the police station and said to release Johnson. And he saw the state of Johnson. He was bleeding to death. And he said, we're not going to leave until you give him the proper medical attention. So then the ambulance was called. The ambulance came, and Malcolm with his 50 men and the rest of the huge angry mob, they marched 15 blocks to the hospital, and they made sure that he was getting the proper attention. After this incident, the nation in New York City rose to prominence. They got so much publicity. Everybody was talking about them. Before, they weren't that famous, but now everybody was talking about them. Who are these Nation of Islam people? They're leading us. We have to follow them. It was also around this time where the police chief of the station where that happened, speaking about Malcolm X, he said, "No one man should have that much power." He was scared of him. Another thing I didn't mention before was that in the nation there's something called the fruit of Islam, that's how they call it. It was basically young African American brothers that were part of the nation, young Muslim brothers, strong. They were armed, they learned judo and karate, and they were disciplined. So they were basically like army, or they were also bodyguards too, whenever Elijah was in town. So they were like a force. So this is how they were able to get assembled so quickly in front of the station. So as they rose to prominence, the media started to talk about them. And there was one documentary made called "The Hate That Hate Produced." And this was trying to make them look bad. It was controversial. It used videos and images that were controversial, trying to make people shocked and surprised. Who are these people? And it was a national documentary. So after this happened, they started to get more publicity. A lot of people started to hate them. And people on the aisle, angry white people and Uncle Tomming African American people, they were both calling Malcolm X at the masjid, saying that what he was doing was wrong. You need to stop, you're crazy, all these kind of things. But Malcolm, using his debate skills from prison, he fought back, and he knew how to construct effective arguments to defend his nation. The Nation of Islam did more than just help African Americans of this country feel proud of their identity and their heritage. They also accomplished amazing things in helping addicts get off the streets. Muslims had a strict code of not using anything that hurts your body. So any Muslim has to get off drugs. And the way that they did this was extremely effective to get new Muslims off of drugs. They would find an ex-addict. They would send him to the places where he used to go, an ex-addict from their own community. Send him to the places where he used to go to get his fix and to be among his old friends that he used to do drugs with. And they would send this ex-addict looking clean, looking dressed nice, and he would be an example to the other guys. And he would beat it into their heads that you guys are addicted and I can help you get out. Because the biggest step of getting off of drugs is just admitting you have a problem. Any addiction, you have to admit that you have a problem. So they would beat it into their heads until they understand they have a problem. And then when they're ready, they say, okay, come with me to the Muslim restaurant. They always had a Muslim restaurant wherever a Muslim masjid was. And so he would come in for a free meal, and he would come in and he would see the discipline in the Muslims and how they treated each other with respect. And the Muslims would treat him with respect. They would pretend he wasn't looking dirty and smelly and on all kinds of drugs. They would treat him like he was one of them. So he would see this. And then when he was ready, they would help him to get off. And how they did that? They did it cold turkey. So immediately you cut off the drugs. So the Muslims would volunteer to watch him around the clock for a day, 2 days, however long it took him. They would put him in a room, they would sit with him, lock the door, and no drugs. And they would witness the painful withdrawals, the throwing up, the vomiting, the diarrhea, anything that was part of this addiction, they would witness it. And then they would encourage him that he can beat this, you can get out of it. Then when he was finally over it, they would help him get him back on his feet. They would feed him some soup and tea, things that would help him get on his feet. And then this addict would never forget those people that were with him in that room in his darkest moments of his life. And it was often these addicts that were the best Muslims once they got off the drugs. So this method was more effective than anything the government was doing. So the government actually came to the nation asking them for how, like, what do you guys do? We need help. Like, you guys are effective. So Elijah's health deteriorated. They bought him a huge mansion in Arizona, and where the weather was better for him, and he kind of took a step back, and he made Malcolm national spokesman of the nation, and Malcolm became a master of the media. He figured out all their tricks. You know, his debating skills. He was able to intelligently debate anybody. He was invited to the top radio and news stations. They were all trying to expose him, but he had strong arguments and he defended the nation well. And he always gave credit to Elijah Muhammad. He always said, everything that I have and every success that I've had is due to Elijah Muhammad. Malcolm preached that he was a product of the northern ghettos. So people knew that the South was racist, but he said, I'm a product of the northern ghettos. These white liberals always preaching about integration, saying that we're going to help you, we're going to integrate you into our society, but at the same time they would shove them into the most unwanted places of the city, and they'd not let them come into their neighborhood, they'd not let them come to their restaurants. And so this is where Malcolm got his famous analogy of the fox and the wolf. He said the white southerner is a wolf who bares his teeth to the black man. So the black man is never confused about who his enemy is. And that way he can stand up and fight them. But the northern liberal is a fox. He smiles to you, but then at the same time he's not trying to give you all the things that he's promising. So the northern liberal, they throw you a few crumbs off the table of their white power structure, and then they act as if they're making things right for 400 years of slavery and exploitation. So Malcolm started to go across the country preaching, not just preaching the Nation of Islam, but he would make appearances on TV shows, on radios. He would speak at the most prestigious universities in the country. This man who had never studied past 8th grade was debating the top intellectual people in the country in philosophical debates. One time he was giving a talk in Harvard, and he was startled because he looked outside the window and he noticed the building across the street was one of the places where he used to hide out with his burglary gang, literally across the street. And he was now giving a talk in Harvard. So he was crisscrossing the country almost 4 times a week, going to LA, going to Atlanta, going to Seattle, going to all these different places. And everywhere he could, he would start a masjid. He started over 100 masjids. Either he started it himself or he helped start over 100 masjids in the country. But then rumors started to come out that he was trying to take over the nation because Elijah had become more silent. This man who had never taken a penny more than he needed, only things he owned was his car, his clothes, and his watch, I think, and his suitcase. These are the only things that he personally owned. But yet they were trying to say that he was making money off the nation, he was trying to take over. And he always gave credit to Elijah, even though from 400 people when he joined to 40,000 people now, and most of that growth had come from him, yet he still gave all credit to Elijah. Because of this jealousy from the people in Chicago, so Elijah had moved, but his sons and other founders were in Chicago. Because of this jealousy, he started to reject all these opportunities. You know, like Newsweek wanted to write an article about him. Some people wanted to make documentaries about him, but he said, no, I have to reject because I don't want people to be jealous. Soon after, Elijah announced that he was going to make Malcolm national minister. So this is equal to being national imam of the United States for them. And he announced in this rally that Malcolm was his most faithful, hardworking minister. Soon after this, the lawsuits came out that he had fathered 2 children of his secretaries that he wasn't married to. Malcolm had heard these rumors, but he pushed them to the back of his brain. He said, Elijah can do no wrong. He's a prophet. But he sought out those 2 women and he interviewed them about what had happened. And he started to realize that Elijah really had done this. And not only that, but Elijah had been bad-mouthing him behind his back. Elijah told his secretaries and other people that one day Malcolm will turn against me and he's not to be trusted, even though he never told Malcolm this. He always said that you were my most trusted minister. Soon after this, JFK was assassinated in Dallas. And Elijah sent a message to all his ministers, don't say anything about it, it's going to give us bad publicity. But Malcolm was at a lecture and someone asked a question, and without thinking, he responded saying that JFK's assassination is an example of the chickens coming home to roost, his famous quote. And what he meant by this was that the violent and hateful way that the American government treated black people in the country, it manifested in the violent and hateful death of JFK. So this is what he meant. But when that happened, Elijah got extremely angry. He told Malcolm that he was silenced for 90 days. And silence meant that he could not preach at any masjid, he could not talk at any rally, he could not give any radios, nothing. My laptop died, so I have to use my phone. Okay. So Malcolm completely submitted to this from Elijah. He said, I'm not going to say anything. But soon after, some rumors started coming out that he heard a minister telling some other people that if you knew what Elijah had if you knew what Malcolm had done to Elijah, you would go out and kill Malcolm yourself. And Malcolm said his instincts told him that he was being set up. He said nobody could. Just think about it. Malcolm, the national minister, who would authorize the death of Malcolm other than the man himself, Elijah Muhammad? So he knew it was coming from the top down. So in this tense moment, Malcolm was lucky. He got an invite to go down to Miami from his friend Cassius Clay, who was Muhammad Ali. And Cassius was about to fight Sonny Liston, who was a huge heavyweight champion, and he was dominant. Nobody thought Cassius was going to win. Malcolm went down, and Cassius had recently joined the Nation of Islam, but it wasn't, nobody knew yet, it was still secret. So Malcolm went down with his family, took them on a vacation to Miami, and he was with Cassius during his camp of getting ready for the fight. And he was seen in a photo, they took a photograph of him and put it in the newspapers. And then Chicago HQ of Nation of Islam, they got angry. And look at this hypocrisy. They told Malcolm that, why are you taking a picture with Cassius? We know he's Muslim, but he has no chance. You're just going to make us look bad. So, but Malcolm said that he knew, he had a feeling that this was going to be how Islam was going to be shown to be superior in front of the world. He said this fight was Cassius's chance to make Islam superior. And he said that he knew that this was Allah's intent. Malcolm knew. Malcolm took Cassius before the fight. They made dua together, they prayed together. And he told him, you're going to win this, and you're going to proclaim to the world that you're Muslim. So Cassius then went on and shocked the world, and he won the fight against Sonny Liston. And as soon as he finished, they gave him the mic, and he recited the shahada, the correct shahada. He recited it in front of the world, and everyone knew he was Muslim. Later, when Malcolm was to go for Hajj, Malcolm realized that everyone in the Muslim world had known about this fight. So this was his win, and his proclamation of his Islam had reached the end of the world, the whole world. After the fight, Malcolm went back to Harlem, and the tension was still high. One day after giving a talk at his masjid, one of his loyal assistants came and said, I was given a task, but I didn't do it. And he said, they told me to wire your car so when you turn it on, it blows up. but it's because he was a loyal assistant, he didn't do it. And Malcolm thanked him for saving his life. Malcolm said he knew how Muslims thought. He said if a Muslim thought the right thing was to do something, if Elijah had told him, he would have done it no matter what. Nobody could have convinced him otherwise. So that's why Muslims were someone you didn't want to mess with. And he said he's the one who taught them how to think, so he knew what the mindset was. So he knew people were going to be after him. He began to plan his next steps. He decided to open his own masjid in Harlem, called the Muslim Mosque. Then he arranged to go for Hajj. His sister Ella advanced him some money to pay for his trip. So to get a visa, he had to get a signed letter from an authority in New York City who was an Egyptian scholar. His name was Dr. Mahmoud Shawarbi. And so Shawarbi knew of Malcolm, and he was glad to sign the letter for him. He also gave Malcolm a book called The Eternal Message of Muhammad, written by Abdurrahman Azam. Remember these names because it's going to be important later. So Mahmoud Shawarbi gave Malcolm the book called The Eternal Message of Muhammad, written by Abdurrahman Azam, Dr. Azam. Azam wanted this book to be given particularly to Malcolm. He had been following him from overseas. Azam was also a close advisor of King Faisal of Saudi Arabia, so he was up there in the government, the author of the book. Then Shawarbi gave Malcolm the number of the author's son. His name is Umar Azam, and he lived in Jeddah. So Malcolm was going straight to Jeddah. So he went there, and immediately he was shocked to see all the different colors and ethnicities of people, all wearing the same thing, all saying the same thing, all with the same intentions. And it seemed like there was no difference in color whatsoever. He was shocked by this. He had never seen anything like this. But before Malcolm could get on a plane, he had to, they said he had an American passport, and he had to go to a judge, and the judge would test him if he was Muslim. They didn't want to let anyone who wasn't Muslim to go to Hajj. So Malcolm went, and they put him in a room. There was a few other Muslim people from various countries, Russia, Turkey, different countries. They were all sitting around waiting. And a guide was sent to Malcolm to see if he knew how to pray. And Malcolm was completely embarrassed because they were praying wrong the whole time. This man, the national imam of the United States, and he didn't know how to pray the right way. So the guide taught him how to pray, and Malcolm practiced for hours until his feet were swollen. The whole day he practiced until the next morning. He didn't sleep. But the other people in the room watching him, they were inspired by him, and they were extremely nice. Even though they couldn't communicate, they offered him food, they offered him blankets, they offered him different things. And he was honored by the hospitality that they offered him. So while Malcolm was waiting, he suddenly had the idea, hey, I have the number of this guy who lives in Jeddah, the son of the author. Why don't I call him? Maybe he can help me. So he called the guy. Immediately the guy came to the airport. He came, he got him through the customs and everything within minutes. So that was a good friend to have. So Omar, the son, drove to his father, who was the author of the book. He drove to his house. Actually, Omar drove to his own house, where his father was waiting. And his father hugged him like it was his own son. So he was receiving so much hospitality from these guys, and he said they would have passed as white in America, but they were treating him like so nicely. Every time a white person had done something nice for him before, he knew why they were doing it. He knew the hidden intent behind it. But this time he was like, what's so important about me? I've just been excommunicated from the Nation of Islam. Right now I'm in a weak point, and these guys are friends with the king of the country. Like, why is he doing all this for me? Not only that, what he did for Malcolm was he gave Malcolm his own penthouse in the Jeddah Palace Hotel, and he said, I'm going to be sleeping with my son tonight, you take my penthouse. So Malcolm went home to the penthouse, and he just made dua, the most sincere dua he ever made. So that difference, seeing the two men who would have passed as white doing all this for him, that in one instant it changed his mindset about the white man being the devil. Immediately it changed his mindset. From then on, Malcolm was to receive VIP treatment. He got a special car with a driver that drove him directly to the masjid, and he started to perform Hajj. And he had a guide who took him through all the process because he didn't know how to do any of it. Then after he finished, he wrote a letter to be published in the media, as well as he wrote a letter to his wife and his his sister. And in these letters, he talked about the amazing colorblindness and the brotherhood that he had witnessed during Hajj. He wrote that he had found the cure to racism and that it was Islam. And he said knew that he had found true Islam while being in Mecca. However, these days I see that there's still racism in our communities, in our ummah, and this needs to be erased, because people like Malcolm X were so inspired by the brotherhood and the colorblindness that he saw in our ummah, but nowadays we see racism is finding its way into our community. So when we see racism, we need to repel it, we need to expel it from our community. It has no place in our community. Malcolm also met officials that were from different countries around the world, especially from Africa. And they told him to come visit their countries and start to build relationships with him so that they can help their brothers in Africa. They can help their brothers and sisters in the United States. The African countries wanted to help their brothers and sisters in the United States. So Malcolm flew all over Africa and started to meet these different diplomats. He went to Egypt, Nigeria, Ghana, Senegal, Morocco, and Algeria. And he learned about how they had kicked out the colonial powers, or they were fighting, if they're not kicked out, they were fighting against them. And he was inspired by this. So Malcolm went back to New York City after a nice trip in Mecca and Africa. And as soon as he landed in the airport, he was swarmed by reporters. And everyone's asking him, is it real? Did you really change your mind? Do you not hate white people anymore? And he said, it's true that I no longer believe all white people are evil, because I saw the true brotherhood in Mecca. I saw white people being nice to me for no reason. But then he said the collective white man in America has still done irreparable damage to the collective black people of America. And so he said he was still going to continue his fight against racism no matter what. So Malcolm knew, he talks about how he knew that the seeds of racism are deeply rooted inside of society and inside of people. A lot of times he said he had seen white people who claimed not to be racist, but then when a test came, they had prejudices deep within them. And we have to, each of us inside this room need to look inside of us, need to see if there's any deeply rooted racism inside of us, and if we find it, we expel it from us. Not only that, but if you start to understand how racism manifests itself in society, if you read his book and you start to understand the mindset of how racism manifests itself, you will start to notice that racism still exists. Although it is more subtle today, it's not as open as before, but racism still exists. And when we see this, we need to fight back against it. We need to call it out and can't allow it to stay. So Malcolm started to teach Orthodox Islam, Sunni Islam in his new masjid. He hired a Sudani imam that he brought over with him, who was the imam of the masjid. He also started an organization called the OAAU, Organization of Afro-American Unity. And with this organization, he started to develop relationships with the politicians in Africa that would help him to make things better. Malcolm's approach now was one of extreme urgency, because he knew that when he had left, people were trying to kill him, and he knew that had not left. He knew that there was still many enemies who wanted him dead. So each day he lived as if it was his last day. He worked so hard because he knew that he might not have a chance to continue working. Malcolm was a true hero in the sense that he knew that maybe his work was not going to be rewarded in his life. A lot of times people do things and they're just doing it so that they can get the credit when things are better. But Malcolm knew he was going to die, but he continued to work every single day. And that shows you that he was sincere in his work. He wasn't just waiting for some credit. He was sincere in making a change in the last few years of his life. Those who knew Malcolm knew that he was one of the utmost sincerity. When Malcolm first started working with Alex Haley, the guy who helped him write this book, basically Malcolm was being interviewed by Alex, and Alex compiled the interviews into this book. So when he was interviewing him in the beginning, Alex says that he was never able to get any content because it was constantly just Malcolm praising Elijah Muhammad and what he had done for him. And this was just in a room, just them two. So he was not trying to show that he was giving credit to Elijah. He was literally giving credit to Elijah. to the point that he was so loyal to the nation, to the point where he made sure in the contract that every penny of the book, which is now sold in probably millions of copies around the world, every single penny he made sure to go to the nation. Alhamdulillah, he was able to change that before it was too late, and it went to his wife instead. But at the beginning, every single penny was supposed to go to the nation, and he made that clear. Alex recalls moments in the epilogue of the book about how Malcolm was so sincere that sometimes he would tell him not to print something. He would tell him erase that if he said something that could sound arrogant. There's one story that's very touching where he said something that similar to, he said, these Uncle Toms, they make me think of how Jesus was criticized in his own country. As soon as he said that, he heard himself that he compared himself to Jesus. He jumped up, he tore that page out of Alex's book, and he crumpled it in his pocket. He was making sure that he would never even make himself compared to Jesus. That tells you how sincere he was. Malcolm was beloved by African Americans because they trusted him. He was raised in the streets and he had been to jail. He was no better than anyone else in that sense. No matter how big he got, he would walk the streets of Harlem, saying hello to his people, talking to everyone about anything. He really loved his people. The other black leaders of his time, a lot of them were saying they spoke for black people, but they were living up in the suburbs with their fancy houses in the white neighborhoods. Malcolm was authentic. Black people knew that Malcolm would never sell them out. He was loved and he was trusted among everyone. As Malcolm worked hard to build his new organization, the nation worked hard to make things as hard as possible for him. They were able to take away his house and left Malcolm on the street looking for a home for him and his pregnant wife and 4 daughters. On his way home from a speaking engagement in Boston, he was in his car with a few of his assistants, and a bunch of cars surrounded him. This is just one of the incidents where they tried to kill him. They were about to jump him in the car, but one of his assistants showed through the window that he had a shotgun, and they all dispersed. Many other incidents like this happened. Yet the police and the media never took his claims that people were trying to kill him seriously. The police, he constantly requested for the ability to hold a gun because he had been a convict and they didn't allow convicts to hold guns. He asked the police, he requested them, please, people are trying to kill me, and they didn't let him. And the media just made fun of him, saying, look at this guy thinking people are trying to kill him. Even when a bomb was thrown in his house that didn't kill anyone, that destroyed half of his belongings, the nation claimed in the national media that he was doing it to himself, just to make it look like he wasn't lying about his threats. The day before Malcolm was assassinated, he told Alex, the writer of the book, you know, the more I keep thinking about what's been happening, the less I think it is the nation behind all of this. I know what they are capable of, and they can't do some of the stuff that they're doing now. He woke up the next morning in a hotel room to a phone ringing. On the other side of the phone, the only thing they said was, wake up, brother, and then they hung up. That day, Malcolm had an event planned in the Audubon Ballroom in Harlem. Malcolm had planned to announce in this talk that he was planning to announce the names of 5 people that he had been given, that he knew that wanted to kill him, and they were going to be involved in a plot of trying to kill him. He was going to announce this. He was also going to announce that he didn't think that it was a nation behind it, but he thought that there was a higher puppet master behind all of this. That day, none of the speakers showed up that were supposed to speak before Malcolm. So he resigned and went up to speak. Suddenly, 3 men jumped up from the front row. They shot 16 bullets into his chest. The whole ballroom went into chaos. People dove under chairs. His wife Betty ran to his side, crying and screaming. One of the shooters was grabbed by the mob and they were able to get to him, but the other 2 ran away. And that man that was grabbed by the mob was arrested. The NYPD put on a pathetic investigation. The man that was trampled, he confessed to the crime, but he said that there was 4 other people involved, as Malcolm had predicted. But the NYPD arrested 2 people, and then they closed the investigation. And the first guy that confessed said those 2 guys were not part of the crew, but the NYPD just arrested them, and they rotted in jail, and they closed the investigation. If you want to learn more about who killed Malcolm X, there's a new documentary on Netflix called Who Killed Malcolm X? And he goes into how the whole investigation was a sham, and he starts to go in depth about who actually killed him. It's very interesting. You should watch it. So after he died, the Sudanese sheikh, he performed the necessary functions to prepare Malcolm for burial, and the janazah was led by someone named Sheikh Al-Hajj Hisham Jabir. From Nigeria to Pakistan, Algeria to China, the world mourned the loss of a great man. As Malcolm had predicted, history has tried to paint him as an angry figure, someone who spread hatred. They try to paint MLK as the hero and ignore what Malcolm did. However, it was Malcolm who really laid the groundwork and put the pressure to win black people their respect. MLK, in the end of his life, had begun to start changing his views. If you want to read about it, there was a time where he was leading a rally in Birmingham, Alabama, and he was arrested and thrown in jail with the other ministers. And the white people that he was working with were telling him, you shouldn't have done that. And that's when he writes something called The Letter from Birmingham. You can read it online. And in this letter, he writes, "For years now, I have heard the word wait. This wait has almost always meant never." He talks about how he was going to abandon the non-violence ideas that he had. He said, this is not working. And he wanted to become more like Malcolm X. You can read all this online. But now, when they both have died, Martin was later, very soon after that, he was assassinated. If you want to read more about this, you can see how history has changed the views. They've made Malcolm into this hero-like figure who the only reason because he didn't fight strongly against them. He was more of putting on a show, giving talks, talking about having dreams. But who was actually in the streets fighting? Malcolm was. We have to reclaim this legacy of Malcolm X and teach people about who he was. No matter what anyone thought about his views, it was undeniable to everyone that he was a man who fearlessly and tirelessly fought for justice for his people. Malcolm won respect for his people when they were treated like dirt in this country. Malcolm was fearless in the way that he called out the white man's power structure in this country. Nowadays, we have people that are scared to talk about Palestine, thinking what's going to happen to their careers. Malcolm sacrificed everything on behalf of justice and truth. He is an excellent role model for all our young men today and for everybody. Lessons from his life that I try to implement, and I think everyone should learn. To be fearless in seeking the truth, to confidently uphold justice, and to strongly defend your values. May Allah bless Malcolm X and grant him Jannat al-Firdaus, inshallah. May Allah reward us all and also accept us into Jannat al-Firdaus. Thank you all for coming today, and I hope you learned something, inshallah, that you can implement in your own life as well.